This is Global Forum TV. In our new series today, India 2025, we bring you eminent personalities from India and share their vision, comments and opinions about what India would look like in 2025. This is your host, Ameena Saeed.
The mantra to understand India is Gandhi. Once you understand Gandhi, then you know the way out is there.
If you are going to promote chauvinism of the majority, or what I call chauvinism of the majority, either through the BJP, the opposition Bharatiya Janata Party, or otherwise through one of its ancillaries of what is called the Sangh Parivar, you're going to atomize the Indian political scene.
Rift is going to be with China.
Okay.
India will become, as far as some of the core issues of the world are concerned, the global laboratory. Income inequalities have never been more explosive than they are today. I mean, you know, it's always been an unequal and hierarchical society.
India is a very stabilizing force. Indian history, Indian culture, and Indian population, the Indian immigrants abroad, all this shows that India is an extraordinarily stabilizing force with the capacity for integration.
The whole world is looking at India as the future of this entire globe.
A great country, a proud country, but a country which under capitalism is unfortunately very much unequal. A country in which a part is the urban India and the rest is rural Bharat.
Hello, this is Ameena Saeed at Global Forum, a platform for global issues with global perspectives in today's global village. We are starting a new series titled India 2025. In this series, we will talk to eminent Indian personalities and discuss their views, opinions, and visions for India in 2025. Today, we have with us one such personality who has become an icon on the Indian scene with meteoric speed. He is Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan. Welcome to Global Forum, Dr. Narayan. Dr. Narayan was trained as a physician, but he switched to Indian Administrative Service, where he held a stellar and brilliant career. His achievements and rewards are too many to list here, but we'll mention a few that stand out. As a joint collector, he rehabilitated 8,000 displaced youth. He played the lead role in the creation of 200,000 acres of irrigation with direct participation of people. He made credit cooperatives independent of governments. He empowered parents in schools, helped speedy justice through rural courts, introduced economic reforms in Andhra Pradesh, helped develop InfoCity in Hyderabad. In 1996, he again resigned his brilliant career and established Lok Satta, an NGO with like-minded people in Andhra Pradesh. Lok Satta emerged as a leading civil society initiative for governance reform. These state-level initiatives then built into a platform for national reform. In 2006, Dr. Narayan made another radical move. He started a political party called Lok Satta. Dr. Narayan, tell us why the move from an NGO to a political party. Also tell us about the political and the criminal nexus that you found when you were bothered by it and what you did about it.
When your goal is to transform the nature of politics, non-party activity has an important role, but a limited role. Our own work, for instance, in terms of combating criminalization is a good illustration of this. We mobilized the public opinion in a large way across the country by identifying criminals in politics, establishing certain benchmarks, and then disclosing their details to the public. That mobilized public opinion in a way rarely seen in this country. It then became a national issue. The courts came in, and the political parties, they joined ranks, and they said, we will not disclose the antecedents of candidates, no matter what. We then led a movement in the country. Most of the media and public opinion, they were all with us. And ultimately, we achieved the disclosure of candidate details. It's a big success at one level. It's also a failure at another level, because that did not change the nature of politics, because while we now know that these are the criminals or people with a criminal record in politics, we could not stop them from entering politics. In the long term it will happen, I have no doubt about it. India is so vast and diverse. Many people across the world don't always realize how complex it is. Any large Indian state would be equal to the largest of European countries.
Yes.
And the largest Indian state, Uttar Pradesh, would be the 6th or 7th largest country in the world, with 170 million population.
Yes.
So it's huge. And second, the diversity, particularly of linguistic kind, apart from caste, religion, region, etc., linguistic diversity. There are 15 major Indian languages, as you know and I know.
Yes, yes.
For many people in the world, it's impossible to comprehend that a nation can coexist with 15 separate languages, and with the second biggest language being known to no more than 8% of the people of the country.
Right.
Canada, with just 2 languages, is finding it so hard to try and bring some kind of harmony and unity with Quebec. And given that, you cannot really do everything everywhere in the country. But the situation is somewhat similar in terms of politics and governance across the country. It transcends region, religion, language, everything. So what we have tried to do and what we ought to do is to transfer some of the best practices to make them replicable, but more important, to fight for the institutional changes required pan-nationally across the country.
Have you been successful?
In a significant measure, yes. For instance, the voter registration 10 years ago was extremely flawed. We had about 40% errors in urban areas and 15% in rural areas.
Now we are talking of Andhra Pradesh, or we are talking
across the
nationwide?
country.
Okay.
And that is significantly improved in the past 10 years, largely because of Lok Satta's advocacy. Because we understood the problem, we came up with solutions. And the Election Commission responded magnificently, and there is now a vast improvement.
Okay.
For instance, criminalization of politics. While we could not undermine or reduce criminalization, we could at least expose the problem across the country. Today there is a law in the country whereby every candidate for electoral office in India has to disclose his criminal and financial antecedents.
And that law has, we owe it to Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan for bringing that law into practice. Dr. Narayan, I want to now ask you questions about our India 2025 series. How do you see India today in the world scene?
India in many ways is a paradox. It has enormous promise, great potential, but it's generally recognized within India and outside that that potential is not fulfilled, though in recent years the economic growth, 9% or so, does indicate that we could be well on our way to fulfilling that potential. On the one hand, a country with 1/6 of global population, a country with an ancient civilization of 5,000 years and tremendous continuity in that civilization, a country with extremely rich diversity and yet harmony, a capacity to somehow reconcile many conflicting interests and ethnic differences. It's a remarkable example in an interlinked and diverse and yet increasingly interdependent world. At another level, if you see India's poverty, the monumental problems, the gargantuan problems of illiteracy, of ill health, of very poor infrastructure, of inequities, of injustices which are very glaring, of caste system, which is a very peculiarly Indian practice, which creates social hierarchies which are very difficult to transcend. We have problems of sub-Saharan magnitude and complexity, probably even greater in magnitude and complexity of that kind. But we have unique capabilities which are really first world-like. India is one of the few countries which can overcome these problems because we have institutional strengths and civilizational strengths. So much of what happens in the next 20 years depends on what we do in terms of institutional transformation in the country now.
What is India's globalization strategy, and where do you see India in 2025 on the global scene?
First of all, I don't think there's a globalization strategy for India.
Okay.
Many things happen in India by accident, not by design, by force of circumstances, not by carefully crafted leadership and strategy in place. Even the economic liberalization of 1991, which in some ways is the harbinger of globalization in an economic sense at least, has been more of an accident. It's a compulsion of circumstances rather than a Deng Xiaoping-like vision of a future that really shaped the issues. Having said that, the Indian society, because of the increasing communications revolution, and the middle class aspirations and global travel and transfer of ideas and technology is now a reality. But we also must recognize that we are resource poor as a country. Sometimes when we discuss India, we forget that.
Yes.
We are, in terms of water, one of the poorer countries. In terms of non-ferrous minerals, one of the poorer countries. In terms of oil, one of the poorest countries in the world.
Okay.
So we have some huge problems. But how do we leverage our strengths and how do we combat our weaknesses in the next 20 years is going to determine the future. And the most important determinant in this will be the transformation of political institutions, whereby we can guarantee education and health care to a vast population.
Where will India be in relation to regional powers and superpowers in the year 2025?
India, United States, European Union and Brazil, in my judgment, they have no serious problems of perception, of understanding of a worldview. Russia is going to be a major player, not merely because it was in the past 50 years, but because Siberia is going to give them unique advantages with global warming. Many people don't adequately realize that.
Okay, yes.
What is now a wasteland is going to be an important area, land mass, both for agriculture and for fuel, because in the next 25-30 years, for the first time in human history, people are going to compete for land, not only for food, but also for fuel. Never before did mankind depend on land for fuel. And this is going to be the trend of the next 2 or 3 generations, in fact. And Siberia gives a huge advantage, as Brazil gives a great advantage to Brazilians. India also has some advantage there because we have right now one of the world's largest land masses for agriculture. Though India, in terms of land mass, is actually very small, only 2.5% of the global area. India already has 12% of the world's agricultural land.
Okay.
It's not going to grow. It's going to actually come down because as Siberia and many other tracts in the world are going to be agriculturally productive, our share is going to come down, but still we're going to be very significant, and sunlight is going to be very important. China is going to be obviously the major player in the world after the United States. Let's face it, by 2025, China will be indubitably the number 2 power in the world, almost equal to the United States. Russia will be a major player because of its land mass and its technological capabilities and nuclear capabilities and its oil and other resource base. But because of its population disadvantage, only 110 million or so, it's going to be a distant third probably. India will not be a global power in a traditional sense. India will be a soft power, an important economic power, but I don't see India as a global military power because that's not the aspiration of India in the first place. And it's unlikely that India will be seen as a power as important as China, however difficult it is for Indians to accept it. But India is going to be the second most important power in Asia and will be an important power globally for regional peace and stability.
What issues will define the relationship among the powers like Brazil, China, India, European Union and USA with India? And will it be oil, water, energy, markets or population?
United States, European Union, India will have a fairly harmonious strategic relationship, not necessarily in military terms, but in economic and in political terms. Russia and India will have a very comfortable equation, not based on people-to-people cooperation, because I don't think many Russians know about India, I don't think many Indians know about Russia. But over the past 50 years during the Cold War and continues now, there has been a strategic relationship and that will continue. And India will need Russia because of its resources. Russia will need India because of its people, because Russian population is actually declining. And Russia and China, because of obvious reasons, there will be some amount of discord, even there is going to be greater economic cooperation, because there is some element of mistrust on the border for a variety of reasons. And China and India will have a reasonably harmonious relationship, and probably the border problems will be solved by that time. But China will definitely forge ahead of India and Russia. In effect, I foresee that there will be one pole of the United States, Europe, with India being comfortable politically with that pole, with Russia being on its own, with some of the Eastern European bloc and some of the countries which depend on Russia for fuel, etc., China being a separate pole, Brazil will be broadly an American thing. Brazil will be more an issue of raw materials and fuel and biofuels, not a strategic power in that sense.
What issues will define the relationship among these powers? Will it be water, oil, energy, technology, markets?
Energy, technology, markets, and populations. Oil probably by 2025 will be a diminishing thing. Already many people believe that we might have reached peak oil production globally. If we have not reached today, we will certainly reach it by 2025 or thereabout. So the future is going to be with biofuels, land-based biofuels. And a shift from fossil fuels to biofuels is imminent, not only because oil is now in short supply increasingly, but global warming concerns will drive us in that direction. And technology is making that change both possible and rapid, because very soon we are going to get grip of the enzymes required at an economic cost to convert cellulose, all the plant mass, into usable energy form like oil. And we are pretty much close to it. Already technology is known, but it's now expensive. But in the next decade it will be pretty much affordable globally. And I see that as the wave of the future. Therefore, energy needs are going to be perhaps the single most determinant of global trade and global relationships in the next 20-25 years. But obviously technology is linked to that, and trade is linked to that, because without trade today, nations will simply perish. Economically speaking, they don't exist if they don't trade increasingly globally. Population is going to be important because a part of the world is declining in population, a part of the world is growing in population. India is one of the countries which is still growing, but also which has an incredibly young population. India will certainly have the largest number of young people in the working age in the world.
What will be India's major strength in this global village?
I think India is a very stabilizing force. Indian history, Indian culture, and Indian population, the Indian immigrants abroad, all this shows that India is an extraordinarily stabilizing force with the capacity for integration, and without any violent ideologies or without a desire for expansionism. And therefore Indian growth is going to be an important stabilizing force across the world. And we have significant soft skills and soft power which will be important for the global growth.
Despite the fact that India has a burgeoning middle class of about 300 million people, there are as many people who are an underclass. What will be their condition in 2025?
I am reasonably confident that we will be able to fulfill our vast potential. In the past 50 years, we have failed in a significant measure because somehow our politics and economic policies have ignored the need for empowering our people for providing skills. We have centralized governments in the country until now, and we have not really given adequate emphasis to education and health care. We've been talking about it, but we have not educated our people. We have not really taken care of health. As I said before, while our problems are gargantuan, our capabilities are quite phenomenal. We have actually even today the capability to build something like a national health service in India within the next 2 years, if India really means it. We have the capability. We have a pharmaceutical industry which is formidable, which can produce low-cost drugs almost to any quantity that we require. We have medical manpower or resource, human resource, which is second to none in terms of size and quality. So we have significant strengths, but we haven't really built the organizations required to provide health care to everybody. So is the case with education. And we have to decentralize power, and we have to transform our political institutions.
To what extent India's internal fault lines of caste, region, religion, and abject poverty for millions of citizens limit its role as a superpower?
I don't think religious fault lines are a serious limiting factor, because India has learned to live with each other, Indian people. We probably have every major religion in a significant measure in this country. And while there are problems from time to time, these problems actually are not as big as many people assume they are. The people across the country have the sense of not only goodness, but also the common sense to recognize that we have to coexist and we have to tolerate each other and respect each other. It's part of the tradition. It's the politics of India which deliberately tries to foment communal trouble and see people as voting blocks rather than atomized individuals or communities with collective interests, that is creating the problem. But caste and regional divides are going to be very important. Caste, because for centuries we lived with this moral neutrality to inequity by birth. It's not merely caste as a label, but it is the enlightened Indians also, otherwise humanistic, globalized, well-meaning, genuine Indians, who don't feel appalled at the inequity because of birth. They may treat other human beings with dignity and respect, but they don't see the capabilities being unfulfilled, the potential being unfulfilled. They don't see that it's a very sinful thing. Therefore, it's a larger issue than merely religion or culture. It's actually a societal issue. And it's also a political issue because politics treats people as voting blocks and simply thinks that reservation is an answer, where it's merely a short-term reparation to show that we have the goodwill, but it's not a solution. The solution lies in really giving education and healthcare to everybody, to enable them to transcend those conditions, to give them the capabilities to rise on their own. Regional divide is going to be an important one, because already if you take Bihar, India's poorest state among the larger states, its income per capita is 1/5 of that of Maharashtra, India's richest large state. Already within a poor country, there's a differential of 1 to 5 among large states, and both Maharashtra and Bihar would respectively be the largest European countries, if they were independent countries. So we're talking of disparities on a monumental scale. So it's a huge issue. If we have to grapple with that. While our federal polity gives some space for that, we don't have a German model of federalism whereby equalization is a guiding principle.
Scenario for India in 2025.
The worst case scenario would be if the 300 million or so Indians who don't get even a modicum of education, and if the 600 million or so people who struggle every day to get even minimal health care, and if the hundreds of millions of young people who are either unemployed or underemployed don't get the skills required to be productive members of the community. Unemployment is a product in India of lack of skills. It's not lack of employment, it's lack of employability that is a challenge. Then we could have serious strife within society across these class lines. It could lead to all sorts of violence and disorganization and anarchy. The second great danger is the regional divide I'm talking about. The south and the west of India, broadly speaking, are forging ahead economically, though within these regions again there are many discords, as I mentioned before, the class lines.
Best case scenario.
No, worst case scenario.
Okay,
the worst case scenario. So the south and west could forge ahead while the north and the east may remain far behind. There is no democratic society which ever endured such vast regional inequalities on such monumental scale. If it's a small percentage of the population in one part of the country, that's a different matter. But if it's a vast proportion of the population across regions with tremendous disparities, we simply don't have a parallel so far. I can't think of another democratic country where this 5-to-1 differential, which might well become 10-to-1 in the next 10 years actually, because even now Western India and Southern India are growing much faster than Eastern India and Northern India. That's going to be a great danger. These are the two worst case scenarios. The best case scenario is that A, we rebuild our political and governance institutions and decentralize power. B, we guarantee adequate education and health care and skills to everybody, and we are capable of that. But for that, the first one is a precondition, governance institutions and political institutions. And C, we find a constitutional mechanism to overcome the regional imbalances. Once that happens, we will be a moderately prosperous country, not an affluent country. That's a pipe dream, let's face it.
We can be affluent for some.
Yeah, that always will. Even now it is for some, for a select few. But as a country, we'll be a moderately prosperous country, which is a reasonably good state to be in. But growing as fast as it's growing now, or even faster, because we can grow actually even faster than today. Despite many constraints, that we are growing at 9% is actually a tribute to what Indians are capable of doing.
Right.
But there are many formidable constraints. So the growth will be continuing on a much faster pace. And the third is, India will be playing an even more important role, not necessarily an assertive role, but an even more important role, not only in South Asia, but in Asia, in stabilizing both the markets and the security situation. And we will be finding a lot of peace and harmony, because India, even today, despite all the formidable obstacles, is a relatively peaceful and harmonious country.
What kind of relationship you see between India and Pakistan in 2025, and what will be the shape of South Asia by then?
India-Pakistan almost certainly anticipate that the Kashmir problem will be resolved.
Will be resolved.
Yes, I have no doubt about that, because already I think we are well on course. On both sides of the border, there is a recognition that A, we must find an equitable solution, and B, that there are elements of that solution which are self-evident. It's not really that difficult as it's made out to be, provided politically people restrain from stirring the pot, deliberately keep the issue alive for short-term political gains. And I think both nations suffered enough to recognize that it's not in the interest of the peoples, and the people recognize there's enormous amity and goodwill between the peoples. Once that is solved, I'm certain that India-Pakistan will have two significant advances made, and that is economically we'll be integrated. It's almost a bit like European Union economically. And there'll be free flow of not only goods and services, but also people across the border between India and Pakistan. I really foresee that happening. I have no doubt about it. South Asia itself will be a part of this process, and it will be economically integrated. I have no doubt about it. And again, free flow of people is eminently possible. But the big question mark is the Sri Lankan problem of LTTE.
Yes.
If they can overcome the problem of language, it all started with language. India has been both wise and fortunate in being able to address the enormous diversity of language and yet forge unity and harmony in society. Whereas Sri Lanka, because of one fatal mistake that they committed, otherwise they did very well in terms of education, healthcare, in terms of governance, they were better than India, let's be frank. But one fatal mistake, and that was in not being able to address the issue of linguistic differences. Today it led to chauvinism, ultranationalism, and an extremely serious, probably the world's greatest terrorist challenge in terms of its impact and terroristic capabilities. But if they can address that question of federalism and language in Sri Lanka, and I believe they will, it will take some time, then that will be part of the larger South Asian family. We'll be economically united with people-to-people flow across the borders. Even now, actually, across many countries, people very easily move.
Where do you see the largest Indian minority, the Indian Muslims, placed in the emerging Indian superpower scenario?
First of all, I don't think Indian Muslims are different from Indian non-Muslims. They're really the same. Obviously, there are going to be some minor cultural differences, and of course there are issues of faith and religion, and that's something that universal. And India has always learned to recognize and respect other faiths within the community. Hindus recognize Muslims, Muslims recognize Hindus, and they coexist. Actually, the more you go into the villages, the more harmonious they are. It's in the towns where they're ghettoized there is a problem. So it's the ghettoization and physical isolation that is leading to problems. I believe that the problem is essentially political, because politicians see voting blocks. With the universal adult franchise, it's convenient to see people as Hindus and Muslims, this caste and that caste, to therefore divide them, view it as a zero-sum game, and therefore polarize the population. I think we have to create politics of not zero-sum game, but win-win politics, positive-sum game, where the Muslim interests are not anti-Hindu interests, and Hindu interests are not anti-Muslim interests. It's an absurd way of looking at the world, and it's possible. The second is, the minorities issue is not merely one of religion and faith in India. It's actually one of economy, and it's one of poverty, one of education and health care. And once we address education and health care issue through political institutions and transformation in the country, this Muslim minority issue can be easily addressed in terms of integration with the larger issues. The political fragmentation on the basis of community to convert Muslims or parts of Hindu community into voting blocks. That is really the big challenge. If that is addressed, and if you give education, healthcare to every single citizen, and your birth and your community will not determine your opportunities to rise, opportunities, vertical mobility available to all, then I have no doubt that the Hindu-Muslim issue is not going to be an issue at all. Even now, at the people-to-people level, it's not an issue. Politically, it's an issue. And of course, given the global circumstances of terrorism and many other factors, this whole stigmatization of Muslims globally, to some extent in India, but much less so in India, I should say, happily, it is there. But I see that improving significantly. What it also shows is that where the politics and governance are the problem, not the people. After all, the finest Muslim actors and singers and other artists, they are not treated as Muslim artists and singers. They are treated as Indians, or cricketers, for instance. They are fully Indian in every sense. Indian society as a whole embraces them unreservedly. So the people to people is not a problem. Politics and governance. Politics because it divides, governance because it does not provide the basic services to enhance human capabilities.
Will India be forced to change some of its norms, attitudes and values because of the force of globalization?
Family will continue to be an enduring Indian institution, I have no doubt. Wherever you are, there are going to be some adjustments in the family. A joint family has already become a nuclear family in many ways, and that's inevitable in a modern economy. The second is the strength of our culture and our civilization and our dance and music and our literature, arts, that will actually grow. If anything, there will be even greater sense of identity and uniqueness, even as it is blended with the West. I have no doubt about that. Third is some of our best practices in the past, like the yoga, they're probably going to be even more important. Already they become fashionable as occupational diseases and lifestyle problems become important in the profile of ill health and disease in the world. They're going to be important. So these we're going to retain. But some of the bad practices like caste, I think, will disappear and should disappear. It's a shame that it's not disappeared as fast as it should, actually. And some other things will have to change ways. For instance, the marriage within the caste groups, a certain sense of xenophobia, even as there is fascination for the world. Indians are unique in that sense. We adore the rest of the world, anything foreign, Western is adored, and yet there is this xenophobia. There is this sense of uniqueness which does not allow us to mingle completely. Now, until recently, we are very conservative. I think the evidence now is that we are going to be, we're going to go through a phase like in the 60s in the US and elsewhere. Some such revolution is going to take place.
You talked about caste, and hopefully we will do away with caste, but Mahatma Gandhi said that caste is the basis of Hinduism.
He was wrong. He was completely wrong. I mean, Gandhiji was a great man, one of the greatest of all human history, certainly the greatest in the past 1,000 years of India, no question about it. But Gandhiji was completely wrong. That worldview is something that's unacceptable in this day and age.
Will the role of religion in Indian public life increase or decrease?
I think it's actually already decreasing. It's politically propped up as an issue, but if religion is really playing an important role in India, there must be an all-Hindu party forever in power. Whereas the reality is, even a Hindutva party like BJP cannot afford to only talk of the Hindu things. They realized. Politically, it's impossible for two reasons. A, by temperament and nature, Indian people always have a sense of dharma beyond religion, right and wrong. It's instinctive. In Gujarat, when something terrible happened, the whole of India, it's not the West, it's not the Muslims of India, the whole of India responded, no, it's not right. We recognize. But I think our civilization has given us certain strengths. We have the resilience, and we have the capacity to forget and forgive. We don't have this sense of, absolute sense of justice, quote-unquote justice, no, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Some people see it as a weakness. I would also say there are some strengths in that, the willingness to forgive.
Is there anything that appalls you about developing nations, especially India?
I don't know if there is a God. I am an agnostic.
Okay.
But I do believe there are two great sins. The first is unfulfilled potential. If a human being who is endowed by nature, by Creator, depending on your faith and your belief, endowed with certain capabilities, cannot fulfill that potential, does not have the opportunities for vertical mobility, not only economically but intellectually and emotionally, does not have the capacity to indulge in intellectual athleticism that she is fully capable of by endowment, natural endowment. To me, that is the greatest sin. There's no greater sin than that. That in today, this time and age, a person's future is determined at birth by circumstances of birth. It appalls me, it makes me angry, and it makes every human being angry. And it should make every human being angry. And the second biggest sin is, aligned to that, avoidable suffering. But there are many, many things which are entirely avoidable, fully preventable, avoidable suffering. Like much of until recently, for instance, India had poliomyelitis, polio, in large numbers. And every day, more than 1,000 people fell prey to polio. Luckily, now in the past 5-6 years, we made a significant dent, though there are still some residual problems in this country. Like, for instance, blindness in this country. Like the number of unnecessary deaths in this country. Like poverty, which is wholly avoidable in this country. So avoidable suffering, where the water supply is not available, drinking water is not sanitation. You can think of 100 things, avoidable suffering.
What 3 words would you use to describe India as you see it today?
The 3 words that strike me are growth, opportunity, poverty.
And you surprised me and stunned me by your admission that you are an agnostic, you don't believe in God. What is the source of inspiration that you have? What inspires you?
I grew up in a village. And even today, in my mind's eye, I'm a village kid. I really can't see myself as a person of my age in chronological sense, or a person who could live in a city or go to cities or travel across the world. That's all incidental. But in reality, I'm a village kid. And the 2 sins that I talked about, I see them in abundance in this country. And they're unacceptable to me. They're not intellectual issues to me. They're deeply emotional issues. That a human being cannot fulfill her potential because of birth is something deeply offensive to me at a personal level. Not only at a societal and human level, but as a human being, I find it offensive. If something is not possible, then I wouldn't really bother too much about it. It's tragic, it's grievous, but nothing can be done about it. But something can be done about it. It is self-evident. It is there. It doesn't happen. Damn it, it should happen.
So what inspires you? What is the source of inspiration that's driving you?
In some senses, the sense of continuity. Somebody said once memorably, and that thought was an amazing one. 2 things. One is, today, the people alive today in the globe, the 6 billion plus people, they account for half of all human beings who ever lived on earth. Many of us don't realize it. Half of all human beings who ever were born and lived on earth, they live today. We coexist with half of all human civilization in simple numbers today. In many ways, we're the heirs to this great human civilization and evolution. The second, every breath we take has billions and billions of molecules, probably equal to all the human beings of earth. And we actually literally share every breath we take with everybody in the world. And we are indistinguishable.
Amazing.
Every molecule is recycled and recycled. No new molecules are getting added except a few meteoric showers. It is this we are recycling. Somehow that the skin color or the language or nationality or religion or something else, that all these things make us feel that we are unique is ridiculous. We simply pass on the genes to the next generation. Even our children, we are accidental conduits for genetic transmission. They don't belong to us. We of course love them, nourish them, but it's not our children alone in a biological sense. All of our children are the transmission. They don't belong to us. We of course love them, nourish them, but it's not our children alone in a biological sense. All of our children are the children of all of us. And unless we recognize this biological unity and this sense of that mystery, I may not have faith in God as such, I may not know, I don't even say I don't have faith, I don't even know much about God, but that mystery of life, which transcends all these petty differences that we create for ourselves, and that beauty of evolution, that is, I think, a fantastic thing, and we are privileged to be able to understand that. All other species were participants in it. They were not observers. They never understood. We are the first ones privileged by nature to understand it.
Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan, thank you very much for
pleasure.
coming to us and sharing your views and your opinions with us. We are richer today by your opinions, by your statements, and we shall see you again.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine.
Thank you very much. Good night.